مرحبا مشاهدينا بحديث خاص في الويب تي في خلال زيارته لجريدة النهار اليوم. سفير الاتحاد الاوروبي رالف طراف بيجاوبنا على بعض الاسئله وبيعطينا نفحه امل بعتقد حول الوضع في لبنان. بنرحب بالاستاذ رالف طراف، اهلا وسهلا فيك بالويب تي في وبالنهار. Let's start with the visit of Mr. Borrell. What was the main message behind his visit to Lebanon, of course?
The High Representative visited Lebanon in order to impress upon the political leaders in this country that there is an urgency to address, in particular, the economic and financial crisis in the country. I think that the leaders know that, so it's not that he revealed them any secrets, but he also impressed upon them to take the first step to address this crisis, and this is to form a government, and a government which is able to deliver on measures which will be targeted to get out of the crisis, because what we see right now is that Lebanon is drowning more and more into this crisis, which is an economic and financial crisis. And the later decisions are taken to address the crisis, the more difficult they become. We are discussing today things which would have been easier to implement a year ago. All the elements were known of this crisis. They have not changed, but they have become much more difficult to address. So to instill a certain sense of urgency and to also appeal to the sense of responsibility of the political leaders of this country.
Before we talk about the reforms or the measures that we should be taking, let me ask you, who bears the responsibility of the disrupting of the formation of the government in your point of view?
I think that there are two facets of responsibility. There is certainly a political system which is built around a lot of veto players, and that reflects the history of Lebanon and also its societal composition, that you have this tendency not to leave anybody behind. This is known, and that makes the political system in Lebanon very difficult to navigate. But of course, there is a limited number of decision makers in this country. And this limited number of decision makers, there's certainly not more than 8 to 10 people, is not capable of delivering on a government, again, which should be the officially mandated unit, political unit, which prepares the decisions which need to be taken and carries them through parliament, makes sure that there is a parliamentary approval and that these decrees and laws are then signed by the president. It is a collective failure of these very limited number of people.
Let's go back to the reforms that Lebanon should take. What are the main measures or reforms Lebanon must implement in order to get out of the crisis? And we all know that Lebanon is collapsing now, unfortunately.
I think the first and most pressing circle of reforms are all the reforms which are related to the monetary and fiscal crisis of the country. The government of Lebanon has started discussions with the International Monetary Fund, and the International Monetary Fund has laid out a number of measures which need to be taken or which could be taken in order to stabilize the situation, and that is a capital control law, unifying the exchange rate, reforming the banking sector, passing a state budget, and other important measures. Forensic audit of the central bank belongs there as well. These are measures which would help stabilize the situation. In addition, you have all the negotiations which you have to do with the international creditors. You remember that Lebanon defaulted on its sovereign debt in March last year. The debt has not disappeared. The debt is still there and needs to be addressed. So there is this most important and most pressing circle of reforms. This is to stabilize the situation and to make sure that the financial imbalances are addressed. Then you have a second circle of reforms, if you want. These are all reforms which are related of how the state conducts its business. And there we talk about issues we call good governance, like strengthening the balance of power and the checks and balances. An independent judiciary is important. Anti-corruption laws are important. It is important to improve the public procurement of the state and other issues. But these are issues which relate to the way how the government and the state institutions go about their affairs. And then there is a big set of other more political reforms of how to possibly address the issues in the system that are hindering a more transparent and accountable way of decision making.
Let me go back to Mr. Borrell's statement when he said that the economic crisis in Lebanon is currently facing is the result of mismanagement and not linked to the presence of refugees. Can you explain, please? What do you think about this?
Well, we know that the presence of a large number of Syrian refugees is putting a very big burden on Lebanon. But I think it would be wrong to assume that they are at the center of the crisis and that you can address the crisis by addressing the presence of Syrian refugees in Lebanon. This is something which needs to be addressed, which needs to be discussed. We're ready to do so, but at the end of the day, what you need to do in order to improve the situation is the reforms which I have just laid out.
When we heard, and always we heard the international community talking about Lebanon, about concerns about Lebanon's situation, so are you pessimistic? And you know what? Why I'm asking these questions, huh?
You know, it will sound very, very strange, but I'm not pessimistic. I'm actually, I have a great deal of optimism for the situation. I believe Lebanon is in a deep, profound transformation of a system which delivered after the civil war, but which has outlived itself and which did not deliver anymore recently. Lebanon has the chance to modernize its political system, to modernize its economic system, to get connection to the outside world, which is more meaningful than just through tourism and the diaspora. Lebanon has in the last decades produced basically nothing economically. It is an opportunity now to get the economy back on track and to get people into meaningful employment. These opportunities need to be seized, but they are there. And I'm not pessimistic, knowing the Lebanese ingenuity and creativity and spirit. I'm not talking about resilience. I'm talking about the Lebanese spirit. So no, there is also reason for optimism. Thank
you, Your Excellency, for your message of hope that we need in this difficult time. Thank
Pleasure.
you for your presence in النهار.
Thank you for having me.
شكرا للمتابعة.